A very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us from around the world. Good evening, probably to most of you. Good morning to many of you calling from across the big pond. Probably not good afternoon for that many, otherwise you'd be calling from the middle of the Atlantic. But wherever you're calling from, you're very, very welcome at our Embracing Complexity webinar on developing a shared understanding of funding system change. My name is Florian Rutsch. I am representing today Ashoka and Catalyst 2030 as one of the partners who collaborated on this report. And I'm delighted to welcome you and just to share a couple of points before we hear from other speakers and a little bit of framing. We have 90 minutes, and to make the most of these 90 minutes, we are trying to set a few guidelines for you here. The session is being recorded, so you can also watch it again later, but we hope you'll stick with us here until the breakout groups later, where we will have plenty of opportunity to discuss. We recommend that you switch to the speaker view. This is so that you can directly see the speakers. In most cases, we'll have some slides anyway, so the speaker view should be enabled, but in the other cases, recommend that you switch to this. Please mute yourself. Please stay muted. Again, we have breakout groups later where we look forward to hearing your thoughts. But feel free to use the chat in the meantime to also post questions there. The speakers might respond to them already during the presentations while they're not presenting to your questions. And please do share your video so we can see your faces. It definitely helps with building connections online. And lastly, we recommend that you change your name here in Zoom to your name and your organization so everyone can find you in the participant list, particularly because we're quite a few people. We recommend that over posting your name and organization in the chat, because that will get the chat very crowded very quickly. So of course, feel free to use the chat, but to make yourself seen as name and organization, we recommend that you do that in the participant list. So why this work and why did the partners come together to create this report? It's clear that we need better social systems, and that was already clear before COVID-19. And it's our only way to fundamentally address problems at their root, because they are the products of broken systems. And luckily, social entrepreneurs and other change leaders can help achieve this system change by practicing empathetic, servant, and persistent leadership. And we're also saying this because it points at the kind of approach that this report takes to system change, which is very much a relational approach, a human approach, not so much a mechanistic approach. But the system change work is different from just delivering more of the same solutions. So when social entrepreneurs and other change leaders go about changing systems, they use different strategies, mindsets, and measures of success. And now what we see, unfortunately, is that most of the funding is not suitable for this kind of work. And that means that we as a whole, as a philanthropic sector, are missing out on a huge amount of potential for impact. Just to illustrate how dire the situation is, one of the very simple ways, obviously simplified as well, to measure how suitable funding is for system change is to look at how flexible it is, how unrestricted is it. And you can see here on the left, the share of funds of any of the respondents, the share that is unrestricted. On the right, you see how many of these respondents have that share of unrestricted funds available to them. And unfortunately, it's almost 3/4 that have only up to 1/4 of their funds unrestricted available for them to be flexible and adaptive in their work. The rest have a little more unrestricted funds. And so this determines a lot how much a social entrepreneur is able to achieve and effectively work towards system change. One more figure I'd like to share is showcasing how much social entrepreneurs had to adjust their work to funder requirements. one of the key challenges in funding system change effectively is to overcome the very inherent power dynamic between funder and system change leader. We see here that almost half had to significantly change their work to adapt to funder requirements, and again, almost half had to at least make minor changes. And if we want to be really successful in achieving system change, we do have to rely on the insights, experience, connections that system change leaders have. They are at the forefront of driving system change, and we will be most effective if we work with them in partnership, overcoming this power dynamic. So what we're trying to achieve with this report is not adding a huge amount of new knowledge, in fact, rather little. The whole purpose of this report was to show that there is a broad consensus among practitioners, funders, and intermediaries when it comes to funding and supporting system change. As you all know, system change has been a popular topic, especially over the last years, and there's lots of great research out there, but also a lot of different language and different definitions. And so these partners came together here to show that there is a common ground among all of the great knowledge that's being produced. And those partners include not only Ashoka and Catalyst 2030, who I'm representing today, but also Co-Impact, and we're going to hear from Sylvia in a moment to speak about the funder perspective. Co-Impact is a brilliant system change fund. We also have Echoing Green, Schwab, and Skoll as partners, joining us in this both as funders and with the amazing system change leaders that they support. The process was facilitated by McKinsey, and we're glad to have Sophia here from McKinsey today to give us an introduction to the report, and they were supported by Systemic as well. This has led to over 60 interviews, over 110 survey responses, and over 70 reports were reviewed for this Embracing Complexity report. Now, while the report describes where we want to get to, it doesn't really describe how to get there, and that's what you're here for. We would love to learn from you how you think we can all help each other and ourselves to get there. All right, off to our speakers. First, we will hear a summary of the report from Sophia Krösche at McKinsey. She was in the team that helped author the report. Then we'll hear from Sylvia Bastante, the Chief Philanthropy Officer at Co-Impact, for a donor perspective. And before we break out, we'll hear from the practitioner perspective from Eleanor Allen from Water for People, who's also one of the co-creators of the Catalyst 2030 network. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Sophia.
Awesome, thank you, Florian. Andrea, if you wouldn't mind share the slides. Great, thank you. So thank you all for participating in this webinar, and I'm really happy to give you a glimpse of what we found out in our report. Maybe I start a bit with the context. So McKinsey, Germany, and Ashoka have partnered for many years now, and we jointly published reports, I think, for the past decade even. And this time we wanted to go one step further and invited also all these other amazing partners to become part of this cooperation. So together with Ashoka, Catalyst, Co-Impact, Echoing Green, Schwab Foundation, Skoll Foundation, and Systemic, we tried to answer the question how to successfully fund and support systems change. And as Florian mentioned, therefore we worked through literature that was written by partner organizations, but also by other authors. We conducted these interviews with foundations, but also systems change leaders. That's the term we use for what you might know as social entrepreneurs or also social innovators. And we also did a survey, which you can find completely in our report as well. All these inputs were then summarized into our 5 principles I'm going to present you in a minute. They're mainly directed to funders, but they can also be a starting point to all other types of financial backers. And they're really meant as an invitation to funders to reflect on one's own funding processes. And therefore, we tried to add a lot of recommendations and case studies that we received and learned from our interview partners. with the aim to be as specific as possible to make it clearer what we actually mean by funding systems change. But that doesn't mean that these are easy to achieve, I would like to add. So the 5 principles are: embrace the systems mindset, support evolving paths to systems change, work in true partnership, prepare for long-term engagement, and collaborate with other stakeholders. And Rhea, if you could go one slide further. Thank you. So I start with the first one: embrace the systems mindset. That means for us being clear about what kind of systems you actually want to change, and also incorporating systems change into a foundation's own DNA. So this could mean, for example, to question how the funding organization deals with risk and uncertainties, which are all too familiar when working on systems change, as you all might know. The second one: support evolving paths to systems change. If you could go to the next slide, Andrea. Thanks. That means, by funding systems leaders rather than projects, and also investing in learning capability building. Because what we've heard is that especially learning opportunities are often hard to get funded, but also really essential to systems change leaders to achieve their goals. The third principle is work in true partnership. That should mean to acknowledge and work against power dynamics, and also to be mindful about the limited resources of systems change leaders. So this can actually start by the way to address systems change leaders. We found that it makes a difference to tell someone a grantee or a program partner, for example. But it also means that you should be mindful in terms of what to expect in terms of reporting, for example. And we also collected a great list, in my view, of reporting questions and also other recommendations to facilitate the reporting process, and maybe also to think about it in a different way. The fourth principle is prepare for long-term engagement. Also by being realistic about the time that it will take to achieve systems change, and also acknowledging that the path will change along the way. So for example, I think 98% of our survey participants told us that they would need at least 3 years to achieve their systems change goals. And accordingly, the funding should also be long-term. The fifth and last principle is collaborate with other stakeholders, to align with other funders and also building networks with other stakeholders to support their systems change leaders. One example I'd like to share was one funder who has a regular meeting with other funders to share their experience and to see how they can actually collaborate with each other. And I really like this example because it starts with a really small thing, a little meeting, and then we can see how this can actually develop in a bigger collaboration, for example. I would like to end with one of many really inspiring anecdotes I learned during the work on this report. And that's the example of one foundation which decided to shift from a more traditional approach into a systemic approach. And they actually started their learning journey together with the systems change leaders they support. So they went to workshops together and really worked together on seeing how this foundation could evolve and develop into a more systemic way. And I actually liked this example a lot and wanted to share it with you because it showed me 2 things. First, that this report is really needed. So our conversation was really fruitful, and I felt that she was really happy to share her experience, but also to hear what we have learned so far about funding systems change. And it also showed the foundation's humility, but also the willingness to embark on a joint learning journey, which was really great to see. And I hope that this report could help even more to be part of this journey. So I pause here, and if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Sophia from McKinsey. There are indeed some questions coming in the chat. I see Sylvia just responded to the first one. Thank you. And I'm delighted to introduce Sylvia next. As I mentioned, Sylvia is the Chief Philanthropy Officer at Co-Impact, a large leading system change funder. So we're excited to hear from you how you are already embodying these principles and reacting in this time of crises. Over to you, Sylvia. You're muted. Let me unmute you. There you go.
No, thanks very much, Florian and Sophia, for the introduction. And if we can move to the next slide, please. For those of you that do not know Co-Impact, we are a philanthropic collaborative that bring together philanthropists and foundations and other funders to jointly support systems change initiatives in the areas of health, education, and economic opportunity in low and middle income countries around the world. Co-Impact was created by Olivia Leland, who is the former founding director of the Giving Pledge. And the purpose of Co-Impact was really to address a gap that we saw in the market. Most funding is actually given year by year and is quite restricted and short-term, and is usually given for very concrete objectives. And what we know from the social change leaders that we speak to, what they need is a different type of funding. It's funding that is a lot more flexible, that is more significant, and that is willing to support everything that they're trying to achieve in their own systems. Moving on to the next slide. So very much how we engage with our program partners, which is our preferred term for grantees. And this is partly because we're very conscious of the power dynamics in philanthropy and the fact that many funders in some ways dictate to program partners what they're supposed to be doing. And we're trying to move away from that. So that's why we don't use the term grantee, but we use the term program partners. And we really see them as and the governments that they work with as the leaders, architects, and drivers of the deep change they want to see. And it's usually these organizations and coalitions that are working in their own context, in their own countries, that have the capacity to achieve this change. And we see our role as funders as supportive and not directive. We have published our own handbook, which is our guide to essentially how we work with program partners, and also contains our point of view on philanthropy supportive of systems change. And most organizations usually publish their handbooks when they're much further along in their process. In our case, we published it relatively early on because we thought it was important to share and be transparent with many people that are wondering, how can we do this type of funding for systems change? And in our handbook, we outline 7 principles, which are very similar and echo some of the things that were mentioned by Sophia before from the Embracing Complexity report. But to summarize, 6 points that are important in how we practice our engagement with our program partners. The first one is about having the program partners in the lead. As I was saying, these are the people who have the experience, the connections, the networks, and who have the lived experience to really be able to achieve systems change in their own context. And we obviously go through a rigorous process of sourcing and vetting, but once we find these leaders and organizations and coalitions, we really support them all the way. Our support is very comprehensive. We offer long-term grants, so usually it's 5 years, 6 years if you include the initial grant that we give them to help them prepare their systems change approach. And our grants range in size from 10 to 25 million. And they also, very importantly, include an earmarked amount for strengthening organizational coherence and capabilities. There are many funders who actually do not want to fund the organizations and do not want to support that side. They usually say, we just want to focus on the projects, on the beneficiaries. But we believe that it's very important to have strong organizations and coalitions that can actually do the work of systems change. The third point is about reducing burdens. We have over 35 funders in our funding community at different levels. I'm very happy to see that at least 2 of them are joining us on the call today. And one of the things that all of our funding partners agreed to is to single reporting from the program partners. And this drives a huge amount of efficiency. Imagine trying to, create a systems change initiative in your own country in an area as complicated as education or health, and having to report to 70 different funders for different amounts in different timeframes and in the formats that they want. And beyond the reporting, which is one detail, what's important to us is that program partners or social change leaders should not be placed in the role of being subcontractors to funders and doing bits and pieces of what funders want, as opposed to what they know from their experience could have most impact in their own context. The next point is about being flexible. We certainly hold our program partners accountable to certain key outcomes that are important and that we have agreed to. But as Sophia was saying, we completely know that the path may change along the way. In fact, most of the successful examples of systems change, there has been meaningful pivots along the way that allow the organizations and the leaders to actually achieve what they were setting out to do. So we are committed to the outcomes, but we are very conscious that the path to get there may change. Related to that is about encouraging learning and adaptation. So in many cases, measurement of impact and reporting is done exclusively to satisfy the donor. And we actually think that what's important is that program partners have a learning approach and that they use data to assess their progress and also to make course corrections. So we make learning and adaptation an essential component of the way that we work. And finally, the point is about supporting the entire initiative and not cherry picking. To give you one particular example, one of the initiatives that we support in Liberia is a coalition of actors that is trying to extend healthcare to every single Liberian, including in rural communities. And there are cases where a funder would come in and say, well, this is great what you're doing or what you're supporting here, but we only care about pregnant women. We want to give funding exclusively for pregnant women, so can you carve out a piece of your initiative and make it a project exclusively for that? Or we only care about children under 3 years old. And we don't think that that's necessarily helpful. So all the funders that have joined us co-invest with us and support the full initiative as presented by the program partner. Moving on to the next slide. So obviously for everybody in the call, things have changed as a result of COVID-19 and funders are responding in different ways. I will expand a little bit later on how we're seeing funders' response and the role of philanthropy in all of this. But I wanted to also share that we see certainly the issues with COVID-19 as a systems issue, and in some ways the consequence of not enough support for strengthening health systems and others around the world. And most importantly, in our response to our program partners, we have followed 5 principles that you will see are actually not that different from our regular work. They're on your screens now, you can see them. They include active listening, showing empathy, being supportive. And on this one, it's very important and in line with our ethos, not to impose our point of view, but rather really listen and ask our program partners, what is it that they want or need from us, even if it's that they want us to leave them alone to get on with their work and they don't even have time to discuss with us. So for us, that's very important. As well as being flexible, which we've mentioned before, not only in terms of plans and in terms of reporting, but fundamentally assuring our program partners that we're not going to pull our funding because of this particular circumstance. And the last point is about supporting fundraising. We have connected our partners to potential funding opportunities. In fact, we launched a systems response fund, and I'm happy to say that we've been able to channel millions of dollars to 2 of our program partners that work on health system strengthening. Moving on to the next slide, please. So, as I was saying, we certainly see this as a systems crisis, right? Not only in terms of health systems, but We know there's over 1 billion children that are out of school, and governments are also asking people to stay at home, which is having significant impacts on their livelihoods and jobs. And it's usually the poorest, the most vulnerable and marginalized, especially women, who are most deeply affected by this crisis. What's interesting to us is that not every funder is seeing this perspective that actually COVID-19 is in and of itself a systems crisis. And so far we have not seen a lot of funding shifting towards systems funding. Now, in terms of what is happening is obviously at the level of the crisis and humanitarian response, which is highly needed, especially in some of the low and middle income countries in which we operate. And we believe that at that level, it's both local philanthropists and as well as local organizations who are best positioned to do the work, because they have the deep local knowledge, the relationships, the influence, and they're best positioned to provide this type of rapid humanitarian response that is needed. And we believe that supporting local organizations is also the best way of ensuring this focus on systems, not only for the duration of this crisis, but for the long term as well. On a global level, there's obviously a focus on public health responses, and also many international large funders are coming to see if they can help support solutions to COVID-19 in the form of vaccines or other types of medical research. And we know, for example, 2 of our partners, the Gates and Rockefeller Foundations, have made significant commitments in this place. Then moving on to the existing philanthropy response, the first step of the response is in general offering flexibility to grantees or program partners. And we are not the only ones that are doing this. We have signed on to the Council of Foundations and the London Funder Pledges, and many other funders are doing that. But in addition to flexibility, many funders are offering additional support, especially for program partners that are working on health. These range all the way from simple stipends to different forms of emergency response funds to no interest loans or whatever is needed. And we're very encouraged by the fact that many funders are doing this type of response, and we believe it's incredibly important to keep strengthening those underlying systems so that once the world has recovered from this emergency, we're even better prepared to face future ones. And the last point that I wanted to make is about the economic impacts of COVID-19 versus the willingness to give. So there's no doubt that COVID-19 has had a huge impact on economies around the world. And obviously, this will also affect funders, especially over time. We know that after the 2008 financial crash, giving fell in the UK by 11% and in the US by 7%. I can give you the sources for those figures, but in general, we believe that certainly next year, overall giving levels will go down. However, the issue is not just this very real economic impact that some funders feel more than others, but it's also the much less tangible willingness to give at the moment. We have had conversations with funders that we have been discussing with before, who tell us how they just don't feel right now is the time to make a significant commitment. So we think that in addition to the very real economic impact, the overall willingness to give to systems change has certainly decreased, and many funders are rather focusing on something very concrete that directly addresses the pandemic. And finally, in terms of the long-term response, I think as funders, we don't really know how this situation will change the landscape of funding, and especially the role of philanthropy. Will we see a shift in this power dynamics? Will we see the relationships within the nonprofits and the funders change? Will we see a greater focus on social justice, equity, and fairness? These are all questions that are up in the air, and we really certainly hope that it's an opportunity to reframe the role of philanthropy moving forward. And moving on to the next slide, please. In closing, I just wanted to leave you with two quotes. The first one is from the World Health Organization Director General that speaks about the importance of strengthening and maintaining health systems, even in the context of this crisis. And then the last one is actually the preface that we wrote to the Embracing Complexity report in January of this year, where we wrote that together we can change the system of funding, transformative change, so that humanity is better equipped to address the urgent challenges we face. And obviously when we wrote that, we were not aware that only a few months later we would find ourselves in this global pandemic. And what I think it's important is that there is growing interest in systems funding, and by exchanging, like today, with different funders and different practitioners, hopefully we can provide greater amounts of resources in the ways the social change leaders really need them to be able to have a more positive impact on this world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sylvia from Co-Impact. Indeed, let's hope that this time has a silver lining and is helping us all move on this journey faster. Now, our last speaker for today is Eleanor Allen, CEO of Water for People. She will share from a practitioner perspective why focusing on system change is so important, how it's different to work systemically, and what does that mean for funding system change. Thank you, Ellen, for joining us. Over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Florian, Sophia, and Sylvia for introducing all these wonderful topics of systems change today. And I hope to bring to life some of the examples from Water for People. So I put on my Rwanda background today because one thing I'll talk about is the work we've done in Rwanda. So just a few comments from our work, and then I'll show a few slides to illustrate what that actually means. At Water for People, we work in Latin America, Africa, and India, and we began working on systems change in 2015. So when Catalyst 2030 came about and other people coming into system change, it was exciting to give us more momentum. So for us, it's so important in the water, sanitation, hygiene sector for really about sustainability. So historically, those who know our sector, it's a lot about building infrastructure breaks, and people, again, are without water. So we really wanted to focus on lasting change, building capacity of people locally to operate and maintain systems. So our main partner is government, but we also bring in private sector, and to have the capacities transferred and keep going. So that is critical to our success and our whole model, what we call everyone forever, getting water and sanitation services to everyone, make sure they last forever, is built on systems change. And for us, it is about long-term programs. It was mentioned earlier and it's in the report. These are typically at least 3 years. For us, they're 5 to 10 year programs. We used to do projects. We don't do projects. We definitely do programs. We take on whole districts and get service to everyone. And we work, again, with government and private sector for moving these programs forward. Why is it funded differently? Well, we began this journey with our own unrestricted funding. We only have a couple funders. This is one of our issues, right? For all of us, is not many funders are comfortable yet and want to fund system change because water sanitation, there are still funders who count the wells, count the homes, beneficiaries. We try to move away from all that type of talk, different metrics. It's about impact, it's about changing, in our case, policies, frameworks, regulatory structures. We use metrics like establishing water and sanitation offices, jobs created, level of service, and it's about more software than hardware, and I'll show you a bit of what that means. In the Embracing Complexity report, we have an example of Rwanda, which is why I put Rwanda on today for my background. And this is one where we've helped really push system change for the whole country. We have 4 countries where we really work with national government, in our case, Ministry of Infrastructure, and now we're moving into health, education, and finance also to support. So in the District of Rulindo is where we piloted getting service to everyone forever, and now we're replicating that across the whole country with government, so with Ministry of Infrastructure, and WASAC is the National Water and Sanitation Authority. So our role in moving across the country is not to be the implementer, which we have been and we still do, but it's really to help support government in capacity building, technical assistance, investment planning to get services across the whole country. And this is a great example of the systems change, because we're changing our system, which is how government delivers services. Management, government, financial flows, all the things we talk about in the report have come to life in Rwanda, and working towards, in this case, SDG 6. So I wanted to give that brief introduction about some of my personal reflections on this journey for the past 5 years. It is definitely where we want we introduce the topic to funders, we really look for this funding, and I would say most times we get a grant that's not doing this, so we have to raise unrestricted funding to do this, because it's becoming more and more a greater part of our portfolio as time goes on. So let's see, I'll share a few slides here. Share screen. Okay. Share. So, is everyone seeing my screen here? Yes, okay. All right. So I think it's worth explaining how our model works, because it's really a systems change model, even though when we created it in 2010, 2011, we didn't call it that, but we began calling it that in 2015 about. So really in our work, water, sanitation, hygiene, really our why is about social progress. So in our case, it's about access to better education, improved health, and access to economic productivity, in this case, better jobs when you don't have to worry about your basic services. So Everyone Forever, as I mentioned, is our impact model. It's how we work. It's about getting lasting quality water and sanitation services. Getting it is the easy part, right? The access, it's the making sure it lasts forever. And that's really changing the system where we work. And our system has 4 forces. So the community brings the need, often goes to the mayor, especially at the district level, says we need better services. And the mayor either doesn't care, or if they do want to kind of stake their political platform on water and sanitation, we are often someone they come to if they know about us. And then the way we work is legal agreements that require co-financing, as well as agreement to set up the water and sanitation offices, to set up the supply chains for spare parts, and to train people. So that is absolutely critical to what we do. Technical forces we bring in are employees in country. We have engineers, we have health workers, we have really qualified employees in our countries, backstopped by experts from North America. But really, we rarely use our history was a lot of volunteers. We definitely moved away from that model and have the capacity in country. And then market forces, wherever we can, bring in private sector to create jobs and opportunities. And then what makes us different than others in the wash sector? Well, it really is that co-investing. We require co-investing from government and the capital phase, and we require co-investing by the users to pay for service. And then definitely the investment of government to train and capacity building in the countries where we work. So when we look at the 4 forces, it is really about lasting services. And our strategy that we're in right now is strategy 2017 to 2021 will impact 4 million people at the district level, which is kind of sort of our bread and butter, our basic work, and then 80 million people at the national level. And that is 4 countries of our 9 where the national government has embraced systems change, and that's Rwanda, Uganda, Bolivia, and Peru in our case. So that's indirect impact, but that's really the most exciting part to me, is where we have been able to help influence policy, structuring water sanitation offices, technical support units, governance, bringing in investment planning. So that 80 million at the national level is what we contribute, or what we, in our portfolio, is our systems change work. So what system change means, and this is from the Embracing Complexity report, but absolutely is about our work. So we do address the root causes. Why are people looking to self-supply for water? And then we want to, because they don't value their time and they don't value quality water. So we have to shift that mindset in our communities, and then bringing in the structures, customs, mindset, power dynamics, and rules. So it's about that local governance supported by district and national governance, and valuing water, having quality services, reliable services. The water's there all the time. It's safe to drink. We collaborate not only with government but local businesses. We create jobs. It's a big part of what we're doing. And this is an example of Laban, who's a water seller in Uganda. And so we really want to look at that lasting improvement to society. And I did want to mention Agenda for Change is a systems change alliance and collaboration we have in the WASH sector. Also, we started 5 years ago. And these are members, all different funders and NGOs who really believe in systems change, because there are many who aren't there quite yet, but we influence the sector and we influence funders and we influence government. And this is a very influential group working on tools, and our agenda is to really promote systems change as the way of working in WASH. So it's a growing collaboration, and very exciting for us to be part of that from the beginning, and now it's really getting a lot of momentum here 5 years after we started. So I wanted to make sure to mention that. And here's another way of looking at how our Everyone Forever works. So building Everyone Forever historically was building infrastructure, but now it's also building the basis of governance for the water and sanitation offices, figuring out the right tariffs, figuring out how to get the supply chain set up so the operation and maintenance crews can repair things. So we build, that's what we call the forever phase, and that's what we build from the very beginning now. We try to reach every household, community, school, and clinic, and then we work into our forever phase, which is lasting services. So creating the service authorities, the service providers, and making sure that the water resources are managed. That was something that historically we at Water for People was one of our failures. We weren't paying attention, and we lost water sources. And then what good is the infrastructure when you don't have water? So now it's very critical to what we do. And then we exit. We move along to other places when service levels are maintained, and we monitor sustainability each year. And let me show you what that looks like. So on the access, getting service to everyone, it's really about these items on the water service metrics. Is there sufficient quantity, quality? Is the system reliable? Do we meet the government standards? Is infrastructure in good condition? Are the sources protected? And those are annual monitoring framework for everyone. And you can see how, an example here, we really want to get into everyone to the yellow and green is when we've reached success. That's how we've reached everyone. Now the forever part is really more on the systems change. Can it last? So this is the much harder part. This is about the right people, the right structures, and the service authority is setting up the water and sanitation office. Is there financing for capital improvements later? Are the right people in place? Are we monitoring the right things, the level of service? The service provider may be one and the same, or could be a contract operator. Are the right people financed here? You can see is red, because one of the hardest things is getting people to pay the tariffs, right? So a lot of work we do is socializing the importance of water services and the value of water, and then making sure the rates are affordable. And we have models that are based on maintaining that infrastructure in place for that system. And are we doing the operation and maintenance? And is there a water resources management plan? So the last thing I wanted to mention is we got a shout out on Sunday, the New York Times, for one of the 5 organizations mentioned by Nicholas Kristof for COVID response. And it's wonderful because for us in the US, New York Times is wherever, like our dream come true. But what's great about this for us is we already were working on COVID response. We just need to keep doing what we're doing. But water, sanitation, hygiene never had visibility, right? It wasn't cool, and it wasn't what some funders like, but now it's absolutely critical to saving lives, which it already was. So we're using this momentum to keep doing what we're doing, which is breaking the transmission of disease and really getting facilities, especially to households, clinics, and schools, and changing the system so those services keep going. So it's called Nicholas Kristof calls it the COVID-19 Impact Initiative, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows about that, because we want to continue to promote systems change as the way of working in our world in WASH, but also just in general for funding. And today the hot thing is COVID-19, but it's anything that all of us do. It's definitely something we have now put through our DNA is how we work. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, for this practitioner perspective. And now it's time for you all to speak in just a second. I'm going to pull up a slide on our breakout rooms that will kick off in a moment. We will have about 6-7 of you in each breakout room for a full half an hour. So hopefully that should give you plenty of time to discuss, share, learn from each other. Do start with very brief introductions. Where are you calling from? What questions just brought you there? And then 2 questions. One, what are you or funders of you already doing to implement the 5 principles? And the second question, what would you be considering or planning to do next to implement the 5 principles? And what would help you, or how could you perhaps support others? And the way we're going to do that is we have a shared Google document that I'm going to post in the chat in a moment. That also includes the questions, so don't worry if you didn't completely memorize them all in these couple of seconds. We do also have a number of dedicated facilitators in your room that will make themselves known, but should you not have one, then we trust your distributed leadership that this will work out. So I am just going to stop sharing here and copy into the chat all you need to know. And then we're hopefully good to go. So here again, the questions, the principles as a reminder, and the document. We highly recommend all of you getting active in that document. Add your names in there, add your organizations. It's a really beautiful way to see later what others have shared, and a way to also know who else was here and to perhaps connect afterwards. In the session this morning, we had about 7 pages of notes in the end, so let's see if we can beat that. I will open the breakout rooms now, and please enjoy. All right, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly saw plenty of action in the document. Do have a look at it afterwards, see who else was there and what else was written. But for now, would love to briefly hear from some of you what you have experienced, what was discussed, any key insights. Odin, may I pick on you to give us an insight?
A few members in our group were extremely lucky to have funders who already got it, and some even those that were able to convince further funders. So that's a rarity that we decided to follow up on. So we want to learn how that first funder did that. We also had somebody from the Academy for Systems Change who, of course, could just build on the personal network of Donella Meadows, which is great, but maybe not something that many of us can emulate.
Thank you very much, Odin. I believe you were in a room with Eleanor, is that right? Eleanor, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I really enjoyed the discussion. So we were thinking about some things that could be sort of, a large change in the sector to get more donors into systems change. So we talked about building the trust, since these are long-term marriages, we call them, instead of dating relationships. Figuring that out. Sometimes the metrics for impact are vaguer, so that trust is critical. Having other donors influence the other, like Odin mentioned, learning how that actually happened, and how that could happen again. And we said shifting the mindset and the planetary boundaries. This is deep and fundamental change in how we work. So maybe we can use what's happening with the COVID-19 as a catalyst, in this case, to redistribute the resources and have more foundations get into systems change, maybe spend down their corpus versus just using the % of their corpus each year and for grants and keeping the rest together. So wanting to figure out how to go deeper. There are some social entrepreneurs that have gone deeper to agitate political and legal systems. It gets pretty lonely, but it does affect change. So those are some of the items that we discussed and merit further discovery.
Thank you very much, Elena. I see Noah here as well. You're hiding behind another name, but I do see you. Perhaps you want to share something, but I'm also happy to open it up for a couple of minutes before Sylvia and I close this call. We do have maybe 2 or 3 minutes for any insights from anyone who'd like to share. Noah, I didn't mean to pick on you, but if you do want to go.
No, I give it to someone else because I need to think about it. I still need to digest what we've been saying. Thanks.
I would like to say something. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity and for the report. I had a very, very insightful conversation with people who have received funding and systems change, which is very insightful because this is something that we don't see in Colombia. Actually, it's not necessarily that we see these 5 principles in Colombia. So it's fine to understand something that you don't see around you. But we talked a lot about the potential of intermediaries that add value to the ecosystem on a local level. So I think those can be leveraging points in the near future, working with intermediaries that support systems change and not just funders, because funders might take a while, but intermediaries might be a shorter term step that helps with the mindset and with many other things. So in a sense, it needs require an analysis of the ecosystem of systems change, and how is it work in the local level in countries like Colombia, which is new in this. For us, it's even new to think about the theories of change and impact. So there's a big knowledge gap still.
Thank you, Andres. Indeed, intermediaries are important players in supporting the ecosystem, just like the partners of the report. One more, if anyone would like to share.
Yes, can I comment? This is Rana Dajani. Yeah, so I just wanted, we had a nice, very interesting discussion, and I just wanted to point out something that I thought I didn't see in the report that I think would be interesting to bring up to people's attention, is looking at systems change. The way it's being discussed today is great. It's needed, much needed. However, it still adopts a kind of a top-bottom approach. And I think to really make real change, impactful change, sustainable change, is to have a bottom-up approach, which is a much more dispersed kind of approach. Maybe it's messier, but it's more real. So to think in those terms, both as funders or practitioners, how do we actually do that? And as one of the people in the group said, it's going to take longer time. We have to be creative. We have to accept failure. But if we don't go in that way, trusting the grassroots, the people, so that they change their own mindsets from being victims and helpless, waiting for somebody to save them, for each one to be a change maker in their own right, creating little changes going around. That's the ultimate goal for everybody. And that's how you'll achieve everything, it's SDGs and all that. And that's how you transmit it from generation to generation. But that's not the approach we're adopting. We're still actually stuck in a framework of a top-bottom. So I think this is a point I haven't seen in the report in that way. And I think we need to start moving towards that approach.
Thank you, Rana. Very important points. I think it is partially mentioned in the first principle to embrace the systems mindset. There's a subsection about making sure that you go out and find system change funders, system change leaders. You don't wait for them to find you, and you need to recognize they might not use that language. They might not even reach out to you actively or believe they can. So that's very important indeed. And in Ashoka language, we'd say everyone a change maker is indeed a powerful approach to system change. It builds resilient systems by allowing systems to keep improving themselves with everyone participating in that change. All right, I do need to...
Can I just say quickly?
Very quickly, if you can do it in 20 seconds.
Yeah, it would be great to see all of the breakout sessions. Are they recorded? And the chat history as well. This has been really great. Our conversation was fantastic, but I would love to watch through all the others, because I think doing so would add to the richness of this discussion, which has been really good.
Thank you, Steve. We were not able to record the breakout sessions, but that's what we had the notes for. So
okay.
we hope that you'll enjoy reading the notes. And to save the chat, we're not going to share the chat afterwards, but you can do a fairly simple sort of Control A, and then it'll copy and paste it over to you in a Word document or so if you want to save it. I think as a participant, you might have a chance to download it actually as well. I'm not sure if we have that enabled for this one. Anyway, thank you. Thank you all. I'd like to hand over to Sylvia for some closing words before I wrap up as well. Sylvia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Florian. We had a separate session, very similar to this one, just at a different time frame, as you may know. And one of the reflections from that session was the fact that, some years ago, people didn't even speak about systems change. And many social change leaders, many of the people who are actually doing systems change in their own contexts and countries, who have the lived experience and who are the grassroots, don't even use those terms to start with. In the same way that there's not that many funders that are openly willing to fund systems change. So just the fact that we are having this conversation now in times of COVID, which to us makes the necessity for funding systems change even more clear, I'm very encouraged by. I'm very encouraged by the number of people that have joined us, and the different perspectives that we all bring to the table, and the fact that we have practitioners and funders that participated as well in the Embracing Complexity report. And we're all saying this is something we need to do more of, because otherwise everything that we're doing doesn't nearly scratch the surface of the impact that we could be having together. So I'm very encouraged by this conversation and by being able to exchange with all of you. And I just want to say thank you for participating. And obviously there's a lot more work to be done, but that's what I'm counting on all of you for. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you for joining us, for sharing the funder perspective from Co-Impact, also for Eleanor to share the perspective of a practitioner from Water for People. Sophia from McKinsey had to leave, but thank you also to McKinsey and for all of you for joining us today. I'm just posting again the link to the report in the chat here. And I think quite a few of you joined also through Catalyst 2030, the Catalyzing Change campaign that they're running today and tomorrow. There's plenty more events tomorrow. There's actually one in a moment with Skoll, the CEO of Skoll, John Gibbs, who also is a partner of this report. So please have a look there too. Plenty of great sessions. And lastly, closing on from Ashoka, obviously, if you're looking for more role models among system change leaders, you can find all Ashoka profiles online, and also everyone supported by Skoll, Echo and Green, Schwab are brilliant, and the other partners are brilliant role models to look for if you want to learn more about system change leaders. All right, with that, we're at the half hour at the end of our call, so I will release you here. Thank you so much for joining, and enjoy changing systems.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Thank you.